Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a genuinely fascinating piece of cultural commentary. It asks a pretty profound question about where America's at right now. Like, are we just a civilization in decay, distracting ourselves while the ship goes down? Or are our massive public celebrations actually proof of a resilient, joyous people getting ready to build for the future? By looking at recent political events, some incredible historical case studies, and honestly, some pretty stark polling data, the source material weaves this compelling narrative about memory, patriotism, and the American soul. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. We're going to cover circuses versus festivals, monuments of resilience, modern symbols of patriotism, polling American pessimism, and finally, rebuilding for the future. Starting off with Section 1, circuses versus festivals, anesthesia or joy. So the commentary we're looking at today uses a really specific recent event as its jumping-off point. It was a UFC cage match held right on the south lawn of the White House for the nation's 250th birthday. Now, for the author, watching this massive spectacle unfold at the literal seat of executive power immediately triggered a historical connection. Have you ever heard the phrase bread and circuses? It was actually coined by a Roman poet who was watching his own empire rot from the inside out. He used it to describe a public that had completely devolved into a crowd that just wanted to be fed and entertained. And the empire? Well, they were all too happy to oblige, basically keeping citizens amused and totally distracted from asking any tough questions about their declining civilization. This brings us to an absolutely crucial point in the source material: the distinction between two totally different types of public gatherings. A circus, in that old Roman sense, is fundamentally about anesthesia. It's designed to numb you, to make the populace forget their problems and just ignore the rot right beneath the surface. But a festival? That's a joyous celebration meant to help a society remember what it's achieved, and more importantly, what it's still capable of building. The commentary argues that throwing a massive party for a nation's 250th birthday isn't inherently a sign of decadence. I mean, joy doesn't automatically equal decline, right? Moving right along to Section 2, monuments of resilience, building on the ashes. To really illustrate the difference between a fleeting distraction and a lasting celebration, the source shifts from the White House lawn to some of the most iconic architecture of the modern age. Let's talk about the Eiffel Tower, built for the 1889 Paris World's Fair. Get this, the initial reception to this massive iron structure was incredibly hostile. A lot of people considered it this ugly scar on the Parisian landscape, and pretty much everyone assumed it was just a temporary exhibition piece that would soon be torn down. But, as the source points out, it wasn't a distraction. It was a dare, and ultimately the people embraced it, turning it into a permanent, indelible symbol of ambition. Let's move to and see how this builds in an incredibly dramatic American example, the story of San Francisco. Back in 1906, a massive earthquake and the fires that followed nearly erased the entire city. I mean, it reduced the heart of the city to literal rubble and ash. Yet, incredibly, just 9 years later in 1915, the city hosted this breathtaking celebration known as the Jewel City. We are talking about an event attended by 18 million people. The entire purpose of this massive festival was to boldly tell the world, hey, we are not done, look at what we can do. Now, the irony embedded in this history is just absolutely fascinating. The centerpiece of that 1915 exposition was the Palace of Fine Arts. The architect, Bernard Maybach, intentionally designed it to look like a crumbling Roman ruin. Why? To express this melancholy theme that all great empires and civilizations eventually decline and fall. But, actually, scratch that, here's where the story completely flips. The people of San Francisco loved the structure so much, they flat out refused to let it decay. They actually rebuilt it in permanent concrete. So a monument designed to symbolize mortality basically became living proof that a city can simply refuse to die. It's a real game changer of a story. Which brings us to Section 3. Modern symbols of patriotism, gratitude out loud. So moving away from concrete monuments, the source looks for signs that the American public is still capable of that collective joy today. And it points to a recent soccer match in Los Angeles between the United States and Paraguay. The source vividly describes the scene. You've got American fans standing there, hands over their hearts, for a live rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. And right across from them, the visiting Paraguayans are singing their own fierce anthem, a song all about breaking centuries of colonial rule. For the commentator, this moment represented mutual pride. It was gratitude out loud. Nobody was lecturing anyone, and nobody was reciting a list of historical grievances. It was simply two people celebrating their distinct histories side by side. The source argues that this is exactly what a healthy country sounds like. Let's transition to Section 4, polling American pessimism, the data behind the doubt. Okay, so if that soccer match represents the sound of a healthy country, the source does acknowledge that much of the country right now feels distinctly unhealthy. The explainer shifts its tone quite a bit here, introducing some recent polling data that provides a really stark counter-narrative to those celebratory anecdotes we just talked about. And that number is the crux of the issue. According to recent polling, a clear majority of Americans, 59%, now say that the country's best days are behind us. Think about that. More than half the population is looking at the current state of the nation, seeing the broken systems and all the political friction, and feeling a deep, deep sense of national decline. And this brilliantly illustrates just how fast that sentiment has shifted. Back during the nation's bicentennial in 1976, pollsters asked Americans if they were pessimistic about the future. Only 15% said yes. Today, that number has nearly tripled to 41%. To put that into perspective, the source laments that roughly half the country feels like they're standing at the 250th yard line, looking around at the wreckage of their institutions and just concluding it isn't worth rebuilding. But wait, buried within that grim polling data is a truly fascinating silver lining. You might be wondering who the most optimistic group in the survey was. Well, it's actually the youngest generation. The very group that so often gets stereotyped as deeply cynical or detached is the one that still holds a fundamental belief that great things can come out of the country's current struggles. The source suggests that maybe, just maybe, the youths inherently know something about the nation's capacity for renewal that older cynics have totally forgotten. And that leads us into our final stretch. Section 5, Rebuilding for the Future, a call to construct. In its final synthesis, the commentary pulls together these historical examples and that polling data we just looked at to argue strongly against national surrender. It presents a stark rhetorical comparison between the United States and rival global powers. Now remember, we are impartially reporting on the source's viewpoint here. It characterizes China as a nation that suppresses its history and religious freedom, and Russia as an economy overly reliant on fossil fuels, essentially calling it a gas station with nukes. It views Europe as exhausted and leaning heavily on American defense. In contrast, the author defines the USA as the only nation founded on the revolutionary sentence that all are created equal, with inherent, creator-given rights. This entire geopolitical contrast is used by the author to really hammer home the importance of resilience. Addressing that deep pessimism we saw in the polling data earlier, the source offers a highly philosophical reframe. It argues that American self-doubt, our tendency to constantly question ourselves and highlight our own brokenness, isn't necessarily a symptom of terminal decline. Actually, doubt shows that the nation still has a conscience. It's proof that there's still a soul inside the civilization that is awake, self-aware, and fighting to align with its own high ideals. So, what does this all mean? We end this explainer exactly where we began, with a central question posed by the source material. As you look at modern culture today, are we Rome, handing out circuses to help a dying civilization forget its rot? Or are we a free people throwing a festival, celebrating our resilience as we prepare to fix what's broken? The commentary leaves us with a pretty powerful challenge. Take a page from San Francisco, celebrate the survival, fix the wreckage, and then go build the kind of enduring monument that your great-great-grandchildren will absolutely refuse to let fall. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a completely new lens through which to view our modern celebrations.